The winter at Valley Forge has become one of the most iconic moments in American history, a symbol of suffering, endurance, and the fragile hope that kept the Continental Army alive during the darkest days of the Revolutionary War. From December 1777 to June 1778, General George Washington and about 12,000 soldiers settled into the Pennsylvania wilderness, not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. The British controlled Philadelphia, supplies were shrinking, and morale was collapsing. Valley Forge became the crucible in which the American army nearly broke and ultimately became stronger. But the real story behind that transformation is not a tale of glory. It is a story of freezing nights, empty stomachs, sickness, fear, and sheer human will. When Washington chose Valley Forge as the winter encampment, the army was already exhausted from months of marching and fighting. The ragged soldiers arrived in mid-December, trudging through deep snow and bitter wind. Their clothes were torn, their boots were worn to shreds, and some men marched barefoot, leaving bloody footprints behind them. Many carried their weapons slung over their shoulders, not out of pride, but because they had no strength left to hold them. As they reached the valley, they looked out over the barren hills and forests, knowing this was where they would spend the long winter months. There were no barracks, no warm shelters, and no stores of food. There was only wilderness and cold. Washington immediately ordered the building of huts, and the work began at once. Men chopped down trees, hammered logs together, and dug out frozen ground to create floors. The air was filled with the constant sound of axes striking wood. Despite their fatigue, the soldiers worked in teams, building crude shelters as fast as they could. Smoke from small fires curled upward into the icy sky as soldiers warmed their hands when they could. But even with the huts completed, the conditions remained harsh. Snow blew through cracks in the walls, and thin blankets offered barely any warmth. Many men slept close together just to survive the freezing nights. Food was the biggest problem. Supplies were disorganized, roads were blocked by snow, and Congress was slow to respond. Soldiers went days without eating anything more than fire cake, a simple mixture of flour and water cooked over the flames. It tasted like burnt dough and offered almost no nourishment. Meat was rare, vegetables almost non-existent, and salt was scarce. Horses starved or froze to death, and their carcasses were sometimes used as desperate food sources. Sentries who stood guard through the night occasionally collapsed from hunger and exposure. Washington wrote letter after letter begging Congress and state officials for supplies, warning that the army would crumble if help did not arrive. Yet days turned into weeks, and the suffering continued. Disease spread quickly through the camp. Because the huts were close together, illnesses like typhus, pneumonia, dysentery, and smallpox ravaged the men. The hospital huts overflowed, and many soldiers died in agony, far from home. Valley Forge was not a battlefield, yet nearly 2,000 men would die there before winter ended. The death toll rose so quietly and steadily that some soldiers wondered if they would even live to see spring. Washington walked among the sick, visiting huts, speaking softly to dying soldiers, offering what comfort he could. He tried to show the men that he too felt the weight of the winter and shared their hardship. His presence gave many the will to continue. Through all this, Washington faced political challenges as well. Some officers and members of Congress doubted his leadership. They whispered that the army's collapse was Washington's fault and that perhaps another general could do better. The so-called Conway Cabal formed, an attempt to replace Washington with someone more favored by political leaders. Washington, worn down by the suffering of his men, now had to defend his own command as well. But he refused to abandon his position. Instead, he wrote with dignity, insisting that he only wanted what was best for the cause of independence. In the end, his leadership survived the political storm, but the stress added yet another burden to his already heavy load. Then, when spirits were at their lowest, something unexpected happened. Help arrived in the form of a Prussian military officer named Baron von Steuben. He was not fluent in English, but he was a brilliant drill master and strategist. What the Continental Army lacked most was discipline and training, and von Steuben immediately recognized the potential hidden beneath the dirt and misery. He began gathering men every morning for drills, teaching them proper formations, improved firing techniques, and how to move as a unified fighting force. At first, the soldiers grumbled. They were cold, hungry, and sick, and now they were being forced to train in freezing weather. But von Steuben trained them personally, shouting instructions, demonstrating movements, correcting mistakes, and sometimes making the men laugh with his colorful mix of English, French, and German. Slowly, the army began to change. Men who had once stumbled through maneuvers now marched with precision. Units that had been disorganized now moved as one. Von Steuben introduced a new confidence and pride that spread through the ranks. Through discipline, he gave the men something they desperately needed, a sense of purpose and unity. Training became a way to survive the winter, a reminder that they were not simply suffering, they were preparing. The Continental Army was being rebuilt from the inside out. At the same time, supplies finally arrived thanks to the efforts of dedicated statesmen and local farmers. Wagon loads of flour, meat, clothing, and blankets made their way into Valley Forge. The arrival of food lifted spirits instantly. Fires burned brighter, men regained strength, and the sight of fresh bread or salted meat felt like a miracle. Washington established better systems for distributing supplies, ensuring that the chaos of earlier months would not be repeated. Gradually, the camp transformed from a place of desperation to one of recovery. In the spring, the landscape around Valley Forge changed. Snow melted into muddy fields, green shoots pushed up through the soil, and the bitter winds softened. Soldiers repaired uniforms, cleaned weapons, and continued training. The huts, once filled with the sounds of suffering, now echoed with conversation, laughter, and renewed determination. Letters sent home spoke of hardship, but also of growing confidence. The men who survived the winter felt a bond stronger than anything they had known before. They were no longer just farmers, blacksmiths, tailors, and laborers. They were soldiers of a nation fighting for independence. By May 1778, word arrived that France had officially joined the war as an ally of the United States. This news spread through the camp like wildfire. Bells rang, cannons fired in celebration, and for the first time in months, hope surged through every hut. The alliance meant more weapons, more supplies, and the chance to finally challenge British power. Washington ordered a grand review of the troops, and von Steuben's training was put on full display. The Continental Army, once disorganized and weakened, now marched with discipline and purpose. Washington watched with pride as his men moved in perfect formation, a living symbol of the transformation that had occurred. In June, Washington made the decision to leave Valley Forge. The army broke camp and marched out together, no longer starving and broken, but strong and united. When they encountered the British shortly afterward at the Battle of Monmouth, the difference was unmistakable. The Continental soldiers fought with skill and endurance, proving that the suffering at Valley Forge had not been in vain. They held their ground, pushed the British back, and showed the world that the American army was now a force to be reckoned with. The legacy of Valley Forge is not simply one of suffering. It is one of strength born from hardship. The men who endured that winter paid a price, but they emerged transformed. Valley Forge became a symbol of what the fight for independence demanded: sacrifice, unity, and unwavering perseverance. Washington's leadership during that dark season earned him the loyalty of his men and the respect of the nation. And the soldiers who survived became living proof that the American Revolution was not won by easy victories, but by endurance, determination, and the belief that a new nation was worth all the suffering they endured. Today, Valley Forge is remembered as a place of struggle and triumph. The quiet fields and preserved huts remind us of the countless men who lived through hunger, illness, and freezing nights, yet never surrendered their hope. Their story is one of the most powerful examples of resilience in American history. It teaches us that even in the face of overwhelming hardship, courage can carry people through, and out of the harshest winter, can come the strength to change the future.